Hi folks, this tutorial is to take you through um, the shelving of data and the rolling back of your front office to that data for the purposes of exporting to SASAMS on a given or particular date. Just quickly before we jump into that, just to point out to some folks that were looking in Dropbox or didn't know where to find the templates I was talking about in Dropbox in your front office folder under Department 2017. There were templates that the department sent out to certain districts and schools with regards to these stats and data collections. But that isn't really part of this tutorial. I thought I'd just mention it quickly. Right, essentially folks, you would see that my computer is as if I was on the last day of last term. And so essentially what I would be doing is opening front office and clicking shelf database. Okay, your data has been shelved. This is what you would have done as of the end of last term. So if I go to my server, which in my case is the F drive, just to make sure, you will see that there would be a data file called data 2017-06-30, which was the last day of last term. Okay, if you didn't do that step at the end of last term, which you should have, we did send out communication with regards to that. And you've entered new learners on the system for this term, and even made learners leave, you're unfortunately going to have to go through the process of making those new learners, returning them to the new apps list. So in other words, you're going to have to be finding a new learner that you've entered. Okay, that is, okay, let's say that was this learner, and putting the year back in there, so 2017 into that block there, and that will make the learner, it will return that learner to being a new applicant. In other words, it will exclude it from the current list. And any learners you've made left, you'll have to put them back into their register classes. This would mean your data is in such a state that it was at the end of last term. Okay, right, so I'm just going to return to today's date. Okay, so now what you'd be doing is let's say we going to do the export today. You open your front office, and this is your current front office. Please make sure that you've done all your updates. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to roll back to the shelved database as opposed to going to your CISoft, okay, and going to the rollback folder and actually opening the old front end that you would have shelved on that date. What we're going to do is we're going to take your current front end and we're going to switch it to being connected to the data that you rolled back as of that date. Okay, this is because there are new elements to the export module that we've had to add. So you don't want to actually be going back to an old front office itself because it won't have those updates in it. Okay, so this is the reason we created this rollback feature. so that you can take your current front office, the most up-to-date front office with the most up-to-date features, and roll it back to old data, and do an export. And actually there are other applications for this, but we're not going to go through that all now. So what we're going to do is we can actually see that this is currently linked. If I go to a table and I hover my mouse over it, you can see this is linked to my current data. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to select a database. So I'm going to click select database. I'm going to go to my server. Okay, and I'm going to locate that data file that we spoke of, right? Data 270630 in this case. That was the shelved data file. And I'll click open. Okay, and you'll see it'll put that pathway there. Okay, then I'm going to click roll back to data. Okay, and you will see now, if I put my mouse on one of the tables, it is now connected to F data 270630. So you are actually now sitting with your most up-to-date front office linked to your data as it was on the 30th of June. Okay, now I'm just going to take you through the weighting scenario. So what it is that in SAMS you've got 4 term columns, term 1, 2, 3, and 4. Term 1 is easy because you enter your term 1 marks in front office into the term 1 column, and that exports into the term 1 column in SAMS. But obviously what we discovered is that for term 2, some people in front office enter a term 2 class mark into the term 2 column and an exam mark into the term 5 column. And so the actual term 2 mark is the year-to-date mark, okay, and that is calculated by the weighting that is set up. Okay, so at the moment your weighting is probably sitting there set up as it was at the end of last year. Okay, if you were using the year-to-date mark for the mid-year mark, then your weighting would be set up. In other words, term 2 would carry a weighting and term 5 would carry a weighting. In some cases, people even include the term 1 mark in the mid-year mark, so term 1 might carry a weighting. So you might be sitting with a weighting. Let me go to data editing. What I'm going to do, okay, I'm going to show you a shortcut here to, let's say that my weighting for the mid-year mark is 1 for the term 1, 2 for the term 2 mark, okay, 0 because we're not earning term 3, we're not including term 4, so that's 0, and let's say 7 for the term 5 mark. I'm just plucking these numbers out, folks. This is just for demonstration purposes, and then the rest of them are 0. Okay, so essentially your exam mark would be counting 70%, 7 out of a total of 10. So, right, let's say I wanted to add this weighting. Now, I know at the moment my weighting is currently sitting at, as I say, as it was at the end of last year, 2, 2, 2, 9, and then all these ones. Now, if I go to my weightings table, I'm going to have one of those weightings. I can take a shortcut and I can replace that weighting. I mean, it is actually possible to, in your weightings table, actually only have one weighting. Okay, because you can just come in here and constantly change that, and it'll change across, or 2 weightings, some for juniors and seniors, or if you're a grade 1 to 12 school, you might have 3 different weightings, for the one for the phase 2, one for the phase 3, one for the phase 4. Okay, phase 1 doesn't, well, previously didn't really come into this because people entered level descriptors between 1 to 7 instead of percentages. And that is seemingly all going to change. As far as we can tell in SAMS, you have to enter percentages for grade 1 to 3, but this is grade 1 to 3 is very customized per school. So we're going to, in the future, when we have time and we've finished, we've gotten a lot further down the road with all this exporting and stuff, and we've got free space ahead, we will start building generic phase 1 to 3. But for now, let's just talk about phase 2 to 4. So I can see that the weighting that is sitting in my set classes is this 2229, so it's this one here. So I'm just going to change this to the weighting that we talked about over here. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 0, 0, 7, and then we just go 0 for the rest of them. Okay. Now if I go to set classes, you'll see that they've all changed, right, without me having to go and change them all. Now there were some classes here that were different. Okay, so we see that there's, let's just filter on that. So there's ones here that are 1119 and then the rest ones. So let's go to our weightings again and look for the 1119, which is this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy that over there. Okay, so if I go to set classes, I can see all of them are 1, 2, 0, 0. Okay, I can filter excluding that. Alright, there are some ones here. Alright, the ones all the way. So let's once again go back to my weighting. That's that one there. So I'm going to take our new weighting, Control C, and then Control V it over that. So now we're actually sitting with, sorry. So let's just make sure that the filter is off. Exclude that, and we should have nothing there. Alright, so all the weightings are now set to that weighting that I wanted. Now when I export to SAMS, that is going to export a year-to-date term 2 mark into their term 2 column. In other words, it's going to weight the term 1 mark 2, it's going to weight the term 2 mark 2, and it's going to weight the term 5 mark, which is your exam mark 7. Now, obviously, as I say, you could have your own set of weightings in there. Now let's say you're a school that only enters a term 2 mark into the term 2 column, straight, plain and simple. You do your own calculations in your mark books, you come up with a term 2 mark, and that's what you put into front office. Okay, then you're obviously someone who doesn't display the exam mark on your reports, because remember, at the end of the day, that these things, each of these term marks, so to speak, in front office, and they call term 1, 2, 3, 4 because it's a throwback to when the system was first created. We are going to change these columns to be labeled report display, because that is what at the end of the day, that's what it is. You're entering a mark into a column that you want to display on a report, and then you have the use of this weightings tool to be able to take any of those marks that you've entered into front office and make them count towards a year-to-date mark in any which way you choose. It's actually an extremely powerful tool, and very underutilized by everybody. And I'm going to press forward and put more and more demonstrations out in this regard throughout the rest of the year and leading into the beginning of next year, because it's going to become much more relevant in terms of the way front office interacts with SAMS's SBA columns and all that kind of thing. And that's why you'll see that I've increased this. For those of you who've been using front office for a long time, this used to only be 6 numbers. We only used to have 6 mark entry points, but we now have 10. But that all will become clear in the future. Just for now, focus on what I'm teaching you here. So let's say you enter only your term 2 marks into the term 2 column. So as I say, in other words, you've done all your own mark calculations. You don't display the exam mark on your reports anywhere in front office. You only put a term 2 mark in. Alright, so what you're going to do then is you're going to have a weighting of, you only want the term 2 mark to display. You want everything else to be excluded. So quite simply, you tell it that I only want the term 2 mark to count. So you make it 1 and all the rest is 0. So in other words, your year-to-date mark is going to equal the mark that you entered into term 2, because that's the only one you're telling to count. So in other words, what we're doing is we're exporting the term 2 mark will always be the year-to-date mark that's being exported to to SAMS. And in some cases, you're telling it that this year-to-date mark is a combination of marks that I've entered, and in some cases, depending on your school and how you set, as I've explained it, in some cases you're telling it that I only enter one mark into term 2, and so my year-to-date mark is therefore the mark that I enter into term 2. So then you would have a weighting like that. And I'm just going to go and replace the other areas where I put that new weighting in. Okay, that was the other one there. So there, in theory, all of my set classes should have changed to that weighting. And if I filter, I should say does not equal this, it should be blank. Yes, so I know that all of my classes are now on that weighting. So now if I export to SAMS, the mark that I've entered into the term 2 column is the mark that's going to go into the term 2 column in SAMS, and that is essentially how. Now remember, I'm changing this weighting on the rolled back data. Okay, so the cool thing is that if you're sitting with your year end weight, you were sitting with your year end weighting, and now you've gone and changed all your weightings. When we revert your front office now back to your current data, all your old weightings, your year end weightings that you've meticulously put in at the end of last year will be there. So that is the advantage of rolling back to a shelved data file. The one area that we may have, and folks, this is going to improve over time as our export module gets more refined and better, and as you get better at knowing what areas to focus on. You might have issues now where, like, you do an export and you say, oh, there's one or two little niggles. Now you're faced with a scenario, well, okay, you are correcting those niggles on this rolled back data, and then when you go back to your current data, you're going to have to correct those niggles there as well. So you may have an issue where you are touching up bits and pieces in two data sets. We did explain at the end of last term, to practice doing an export, to check that you use your value structure, to check that that your data is correct. And I'll say, with reference to the circular that they've been sending out, let me just find that quickly, because there are certain things that you have to focus on. If you do the errors and omissions thing in SAMS, there's a whole lot of stuff that it's bringing up, but they don't seem to be really focused on exactly that for now. I'll let me just bring up the circular. Okay, so as I say, they're focusing here, and this is more for, as I say, the Gungun Glovu, Umlazi, and the North Coast districts. They seem to be focusing on this circular. There does seem to be the Ugu district that wants the marks entered, the test marks entered. In other words, you're dealing with mark books or entering your test marks directly into SAMS. Those of you involved have been speaking to us with regards to the mark book and using them and testing them and getting them up and running. And on that note, just to point out that if you are putting test scores into SAMS, whether you're exporting them via the mark book or whether you are entering them directly into SAMS, they will generate the term marks automatically. So what we're talking about here, this process of weighting, and that is actually irrelevant. So so as I say, if you look at this circular for a majority of the districts for this particular submission, quarterly, for the second quarter submission as of 30th of June, it's attendance of learners, educators, and staff, records of pregnant learners, and learners that have dropped out of school. All right, these are entered when you enter your leavers and you enter the reason for left. Okay, and there is a section for pregnant learners, which you would have had to have recorded for Lurit's uploads as well anyway. Okay, so yes, so those are the areas they're pretty much going to be focusing on now. So it may not be relevant that your term 2, beg your pardon, it may not be relevant that your errors and omissions file, So as I say, it may not be relevant that all the things listed in the errors and omissions file in SAMS are actually relevant to what's happening. There were some things where we noticed that it was talking about specialized subjects, and that's for staff. This has got to do with your year's experience for a given subject, and I've put out modules and demos before with regards to this. This is actually has to be in place for lyrics anyway, so it should be in place already. As well as the fact that in your that's a year's experience for a specialized subject. If you look at your staff records, and this is going slightly off the demo here, remember that your begin service date must be filled in for your year's experience to come out, and that is what goes through to SAMS. Right now, just before we end off this tutorial, it's very important, folks, that you put your front office back to the current data, because you don't want to carry on now using front office and making entries and da-da-da for term 3 and then suddenly realize that you're working off your rolled back data. Because this is, at the end of the day, this is your actual front office, your master current front office front end file that you are opening. So it's quite simple. You go, you log out, you can close front office, log back in, or just click change user, and you simply come back here and you click return to current data. Okay, and you will see that your data, a simple way to test is if you put your mouse on any of your tables in your front office, in your navigation pane, you'll see it is returned to the data current file. Then you know you're working back on your data current file. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Obviously, whilst you are linked to your rolled back data, and once you've done all the weighting and that is when you do your export. You then go and you do your export. So let's just say hypothetically I was still linked to my rolled back data. I would go to my global settings and I would do my export. Now, and folks, there's no need, if you're not using the mark book or anything like that, there's no need to worry about this SAMS mark sync button. That's only with regards to test scores. If they've been entered in the mark book. So you can ignore that. You're only clicking the export to SAMS button. So you click your export, you do your export to SAMS button, and then you log out of front office, come back in, and then return to your current data. So in other words, we're linking our current front office with the most up-to-date features to an old data file, to your rolled back data file. In other words, your data file as it was at the end of last term, doing the export with your newly adjusted weightings and that, and then you are returning back to your current data file. Okay, and you'll see that if I come back to my current data file and I were to go to set glasses, that my weightings were back to what they were. Well, they haven't actually changed at all. All that I've done is I've gone back to my current data file where my weightings were set as if they were the end of last year. Right, folks, I hope that clarifies things as best as possible. As I say, if you didn't do a shelf data at the end of last term, you're going to have to adjust your front office so that it matches as it was at the end of last term. That's the idea. I mean, you can do an export and send it to the department if you've got your new learners on and that, but you more than likely are going to get a letter back or a list of learners back, as many folks did after the first submission, saying these kids are in other schools or whatever. In other words, a bit like lyrics, where you have duplicate learners, they call it. In other words, you've sent them a data file which is supposedly as it was at the end of last term with a new learner on, and another school has sent their data file to the department that did have that learner on as it was at the end of last term, and so now they're seeing that learner in 2 schools. And then you're going to have to, they'll send you a list of those learners, and you're going to have to sign a letter and confirm that those learners were not actually in your school as of the end of last year. So it's better to operate in this way, that we use a rolled back data. We shelve our data um, at given dates, and as we've always said before, this shelve feature is actually quite useful. It actually even helps us um, to diagnose errors, because sometimes we get a support call from you guys, and you say, oh, we've got this problem. Suddenly something's doing this and that. And if you've actually rolled back, if you've shelved your data, say on a weekly basis, say every Friday, then we can roll back your front office to the previous Friday, and we can see the state of your data as it was then. And we can say, oh, okay, well, this is what the difference is now between that data and this data that we've got now. So that's what's happened. So it's actually a very useful tool. As I said, there are loads of other applications for it that we're going to learn down the way, but I don't want to inundate you with things. That is the core feature of that is for the purposes of exporting to SAMS for a given date. All right, thanks folks. That concludes this tutorial. Good luck, and we'll chat soon, I'm sure.